I think we'll get going. It's 11:02. So, Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Very warm welcome. My name's Chris Pataris. I'm the Chief Executive of Council on the Ageing in Victoria. COTA Victoria is the leading not-for-profit organisation representing the rights and interests of people aged 50 plus in Victoria. We've been operating for over 70 years. We've led government, corporate and community thinking about the positive aspects of ageing. And today our focus is promoting opportunities for and protecting the rights of older Victorians, and what an important milestone it is today with the state election in Victoria on November 26th. You may also be aware, or you may not be aware, that COTA Victoria includes Seniors Rights Victoria as the lead statewide organisation tackling elder abuse in the state. I'd like to welcome my COTA Victoria colleagues, our valued volunteers, any members, and our esteemed guest speakers who also advocate on behalf of older people as part of the important work they do. The esteemed speakers today joining us are Housing for the Aged Action Group Executive Officer Fiona York, Australian Multicultural Services CEO Elizabeth Drozd, Disability Resources Centre Campaign Officer Ali Scott, Senior Rights Victoria Elder Abuse Community Educator Jennifer Evans, and Victorian Council of Social Services BCOS's CEO Emma King. We'll hear from these guests shortly after the overview of the 2022 COTA election platform, which is titled Make Victoria Age Friendly, What Older Victorians Need from an Incoming Government. I'd like to start the presentation, so we'll just put that on the screen for you, if you bear with us. Here we go. So we always start with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting. In my particular case, the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations. We acknowledge all First Nations people, the land on which we work and do business. We pay our respects to their continuing culture and all elders, past, present, and emerging, who have taught their children, adults and communities for over 65,000 years on these great lands, the oldest living culture in the world. We commit ourselves to the ongoing journey of reconciliation. We acknowledge the legacy and care of our environment by the traditional owners of the land and the responsibility we have to continue this care. Make Victoria age friendly. Older people currently make up 20% of Victorian voters, and this number is growing. At COTA Victoria, we call on all parties and independents to commit to the following 6 asks in the lead up to the November 26th state election. These are vitally important and will help enable people to maintain their health, mobility, independence, and enjoyment of life as they age. Support of these asks would present a significant return on investment by maximising opportunities for older people to contribute to the community and economy, by reducing expenditure in other areas such as health and community care, by delaying or preventing people from moving into residential care. However, we know that older people are more than a significant return on investment. They're integral to healthy, thriving communities. As I work through this presentation, I encourage people and all guests to write their questions in the Zoom chat function, and we'll hopefully have time to get to a couple of these before we move on to our panel discussion. Okay. In relation to people wanting to view our election platform in full, it is available on our website. Our website is cotavic.org.au, cotavic.org.au, or alternatively, if you don't have access, please call us on 1300 135090, 1300 135090. If you or someone does not have digital access, is an issue we'll be talking about today. We'll get straight into this. What we need to make Victoria age friendly. What are the issues and recommendations that older people told COTA Victoria in our numerous engagement with community members, older Victorians in particular? What do they need prioritised by an incoming Victorian state government? Issue number 1, ask number 1, provide access to safe, affordable housing and strengthen residents' rights. There's been a steep increase in the number of older people experiencing homelessness over the past few years, with older women disproportionately impacted. Home ownership is falling among older Victorians, and only 1.7% of rental housing is affordable to a single person on the aged pension. Despite increasing demand, waiting lists for public and community housing have continued to grow while housing stock has decreased. Retirement villages provide a safe, secure housing option for many older Victorians, but public confidence in the system is low and continues to be so, and rightly so. What's the actual ask? What are we asking? We're asking for improved access to age-friendly housing by building at least 60,000 new public and community homes by 2032 and maintaining the prioritisation of people over 55 on the public housing register, ensuring public and community housing is built in areas that support people to maintain social and cultural networks, to feel safe and to retain access to transport, health and other services that I'll touch on today. We would like them to update the Retirement Villages Act in particular to reduce the complexity of contracts and to strengthen the rights of residents. The updated Act must secure residents' rights to age in place, receive services of choice and have access to a housing ombudsman. Okay, issue number 2, bridging the divide for older Victorians who are digitally excluded. This is a very important one. But bridge the divide, older people are the most digitally excluded age group in Australia. The equity gap for these people has increased significantly over the past few years as more information and services have moved online. There will continue to be a cohort of older Victorians who do not have the capacity or to confidently access information and services online. It's critical that there are low-tech, age-friendly communication channels available to meet their needs. Very important point. What's the ask in relation to this particular point? We're asking the Victorian Government to bridge the digital divide by requiring all government departments to demonstrate how they'll provide equitable access to information and services to people who are not online, and providing dedicated funding for COTA Victoria's information line, which offers phone-based assistance to support people who are digitally excluded. I'd like to make a note that my team and I met with Minister Colin Brooks, the Minister for Disability, Ageing and Caring, on September 29, not too long ago at all. We asked the Minister for a significant increase to fund Victoria's information line. And hopefully we'll get some response. Okay, issue number 3, we're just going to keep moving through this, and please note any queries you have in this during this presentation, and we'll hopefully be able to get to them. Issue number 3, helping older Victorians get where they need to go, transport. Access to transport, in particular, is recognised as a key factor influencing active ageing. Older people who do not drive risk being unable to shop, attend medical appointments or participate in community activities if appropriate and affordable alternatives are not provided. Community transport provides a safe, door-to-door option for many older people who have difficulty using modes of transportation. But the system is plagued by underfunding compared to demand, an inconsistent eligibility criteria and exclusion of people living in residential aged care. What's the ask in relation to this? We're asking the Victorian Government to fund and establish a statewide community transport program to address the needs of older people experiencing transport disadvantage. And this obviously extends across the state, particularly in regional areas. Now, we're moving through this quite quickly, so we'll just keep going at this stage. Issue number 4, ask number 4, improving access to assistive technology to support healthy and active ageing. This is a particularly important initiative for COTA Victoria, and one we have been driving quite overtly. The timely provision of assistive technology is critical to enabling people to remain safe, mobile, active and independent as they age. Grab rails, ramps, chairlifts, hoists, prosthetic aids, wheelchairs and electric scooters are all examples of assistive technology. While these products can be fully funded under the NDIS or National Disability Insurance Scheme, many older people are ineligible for this scheme and cannot access the support they need elsewhere. The Victorian statewide equipment program is underfunded and unable to meet current levels of demand. The subsidy often covers a small fraction of market costs, leaving the recipient with significant out-of-pocket expenses. Many recipients are also faced to wait more than 12 months to receive the support they need. There are, you may not be aware, there are 4.5 million people with disability in this country. Only 500,000 are on the NDIS. This is a sobering statistic. Age is just a number, not a barrier. That is, unless you need the NDIS. Australians over the age of 65 are currently excluded from the NDIS simply because of their age. We are asking the Victorian government to ensure older people with disability who are excluded from the NDIS have timely and equitable access to the assistive technology they need. At the meeting I mentioned earlier, on the 29th of September, with Minister Brooks, the Minister agreed to raise the need for a nationally consistent assistive technology program to support people with disability who are not eligible for the NDIS at future disability reform ministers' meetings. This is a good start. The Minister acknowledged that and said he would drive this. So it's a good start. And it's an advocacy win for us. Okay, we'll keep moving, and please note any questions you may have as I go through this presentation. Hopefully we'll be able to address them. Issue number 5, supporting people who have experienced or are at risk of elder abuse. And I mentioned Seniors Rights Victoria being a key program of COTA Victoria. Our community legal service, Seniors Rights Victoria, provides a statewide focal point for elder abuse prevention and response. The service is a lead in the elder abuse sector. Between February and July this year, Seniors Rights received 500 more calls than were received during the same period in 2020. 370 more calls than were received during the same period in 21. And the complexity of the cases has also increased. As I mentioned, one of the esteemed speakers, Jennifer Evans, one of the panel speakers, will expand on this in more detail and add to the discussion. What's the ask in relation to that? Well, we're asking the Victorian government to commit greater investment in elder abuse prevention and response by providing increase for Seniors Rights Victoria. Again, referring back to the meeting I had with the Minister on September 29, we asked for a significant multi-million-dollar increase to the funding of Seniors Rights Victoria. And we'll keep driving that ask as we move forward. Now, we're up to the last one already, so we're well on time. So the 6th ask in particular is a very important one for a lot of older Victorians and was raised during the survey and interaction of older Victorians as a focal point in particular. Improving the oral health. Many older Victorians experience pain and discomfort, the onset of secondary health conditions and poor nutrition because they do not have access, or have timely access rather, to affordable dental care. While some older people can access free or low-cost care through public dental services, they can currently wait for more than 2 years to access this support. Older Victorians living in residential aged care or supported residential services have little or no access to dental care unless it is arranged and paid for by their family. What's the ask? What's the specifics? Again, we're asking the Victorian government to improve the oral health of older Victorians by ensuring timely access to waiting lists are unacceptable, making a free or low-cost mobile dental service available to older people living in residential facilities and those living in rural or regional areas is a particular note. So again, a very vital, important ask. Okay, so in summary, just to sort of conclude and summarise some of the points I've raised, some of the critical points. These issues and key asks are not exhaustive by any means. They're not an exhaustive list. What we need to, for what we need to age well in Victoria. But they serve as a summary of the priorities for older people as reflected from our research and survey work. I'd like to sincerely thank those of you listening and involved today who have contributed to this work in some way. COTA Victoria are listening. We are listening. Our like-minded, esteemed colleagues from other agencies and other organisations are listening. We're advocating on your behalf on these issues. And most importantly, we're seeking what is needed to support all of Victorians to enjoy ageing. We will shortly open the conversation to a broader cohort of advocacy organisations, as I've just touched on. But before we do, are there any questions from the audience? And I'll revert to Amanda for any questions.
There are not any questions from the audience at this stage, Chris. I did invite them in oh, hang on, let's see. Here's a question. How is COTA pursuing these asks before the election?
Yeah, it's good. It's a great question. So as I touched on the 29th of, or leading up to the 29th of September, where I and my team met with Minister Colin Brooks, we submitted a key election ask briefing paper to the Minister and his advisors and his Chief of Staff. We then expanded on that with a more comprehensive briefing document, which outlined the details of what the asks related to in particular and what they aligned to with other either state or national programs and initiatives. And we also then followed up again just before the meeting with the Minister on September 29th with a very, what I would suggest would be a very overt ask for significant funding to allow us to drive and implement some of those initiatives.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Is there any other questions from anybody else? Another one. What can people participating today do if they want to support these asks?
We encourage anyone participating, the COTA Victorians or not, to get in touch with us in COTA Victoria. And there are many ways that you can assist with driving some of these key priorities and initiatives. We have a number of programs within COTA Victoria. We have a number of people who are able to liaise with you, and we have, over 130 volunteers in our organisation, and they're very valued volunteers, and they're very learned, very experienced, and they have an enormous amount of lived experience. And they're all older Victorians, so they add tremendous value. So I encourage you to be part of that.
Yeah, and we're also going to have some rules that we allude to with our colleague Alexa, going to talk on those a bit later, so how people can get involved. So I've got another question for you. Will the asks be put to other parties standing for election? Yes, that was a matter of course. So there's always a dual agenda in relation to advocating, or the lesser used term these days, lobbying. There's always a government and opposition. All firing through very quickly now. Has Minister Horn indicated any concrete timeline for completion of the review of the Retirement Villages Act? This appears to be dragging on endlessly. Agree. We certainly agree. However, no, I don't have an update, but I'm happy to maybe address that after the event, and maybe perhaps get back to the person asking the question. Sure, we can, yes, take that on notice. Thank you. Rehousing, can we revisit the housing asks? This attendee, I may have missed this, there was a multi-pronged approach to helping resolve this issue, as in more than asking for 60,000 community homes. Yes, absolutely. Just bear with me 1 minute. Almost there. Don't know if we can bring it back up on the screen as well. So there are three. They were correct, building at least 60,000 new public and community homes by 2032, and maintaining the prioritisation of people over 55 on the public housing register. The other two that you may have missed, ensuring public and community housing is built in areas to support people to maintain social and cultural networks,
to feel safe and to retain access to transport, health and other services. And the last one is updating the Retirement Villages Act to reduce the complexity of contracts and strengthen the rights of residents. The updated Act must secure residents' right to age in place, receive services of choice, and have access to the Housing Ombudsman.
Thanks, Chris. And there's a final question. There are many items people can purchase to assist them, example, smartwatches which alert you if you have a fall, but some people cannot afford to get them. So I guess this is going back to the digital election ask. Is COTA going to look at these preventative measures?
Yes, what I'll do is I might revert that question to one of my policy officers who's very well qualified to answer this, Lauren Henley.
Lauren, are you able to unmute yourself to answer that one around the smaller assistive technology devices? This is probably an assistive technology device question, actually, more than anything else.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are unmuted. We can hear you.
Thanks. I'm having some tech issues, which is ironic, the topic of the question. But yes, Anita, so Council on the Ageing Victoria for the past few years has been leading a national campaign called Assistive Technology for All. And the aim of that campaign is really to ensure that all older Australians have access to the assistive technology they need to help them age well. So mainstream devices such as the one you've identified would be covered under that as well.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. And we have another one for you, Chris. We seniors want to leave our children and grandchildren a good legacy, which means taking action to mitigate the increasing climate change disasters. What priority does COTA Victoria give to that? Might not be one you can answer, Chris, but it might be another one that the policy team takes on if you want to defer.
Yeah, I'm happy to defer to Alexia at this stage.
Alexia, would you like to unmute and take that one on?
So one of the challenges for us is, of course, that we face a large number of priorities, and we do some work on climate change. I think if we had more resources, we'd like to do more work in this area, but we also recognise that this is an area in which there are many organisations working, and that if we can work in conjunction with them, that's also really helpful for us, because it's not necessarily, well, Ken, who asked the question, is definitely an expert in this area. It's not a broader expertise in the organisation. So we want to work with volunteers and with other organisations as well on this, because we recognise this is a really important issue as well. An issue that many other people are concerned about, as you say, Ken, in terms of the legacy that they're leaving for their children and grandchildren.
Yes, thanks, Alexia. So, Chris, I'll just go back to you if there's any comments that you want to make before we move on to the next section.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Look, I'd just like to sincerely thank everyone participating in this. It's very, very appreciated and very, very welcomed. I invite you to read our election platform in full on our website, so cotavic.org.au, again, or call us on 1300 135090 if you or someone you know does not have digital access. I'd now welcome our advocacy panel to consider the asks of older Victorians. Do they agree? What issues are missing? And do they think an incoming government will accelerate some or all of these key asks? This will be followed by VCOS CEO Emma King outlining how you can advocate to your local MPs and political candidates on issues that are important to you personally, examples such as climate. But first, our panel discussion. This will be facilitated by our esteemed colleague and Seniors Rights Victoria Education Coordinator, Gary Ferguson. I'd like to welcome and thank Gary and all our guests.
Waiting for Lynette to pin Gary and the first panel speaker.
Sorry, are you saying Gary? Because I'm having some technical issues at this end. Okay. We're going to introduce all of the panel speakers at the beginning, so it would be good if they were all on the screen to start with.
Lynette, are you there?
Yep, she's doing it.
Oh, great.
Sorry, I'm just finding them in the list now. I've just had some internet issues.
Nothing like technology hiccups.
Yes. And Fiona. Sorry, it's just a long list to choose from. There we go.
Ali Scott, Elizabeth,
Fine,
Jennifer
thank
Evans.
Hello, everyone.
Okay. As Chris said, my name is Gary Ferguson. I'm the Education Coordinator at Seniors Rights Victoria. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm situated on Wurundjeri lands and pay my respects to elders past and present. It's with great pleasure that I'm going to introduce the forum's 4 key panellists who will bring their expertise and knowledge to focus on their respective areas and provide some commentary on the needs as we head towards the 2022 Victorian state election. Ali Scott is Campaigns Officer for the Disability Resources Centre, a member-based advocacy organisation established in 1981. In 2017, the Disability Resources Centre published the findings of a public consultation into the accessibility of Victorian public transport, Transport for All. In 2021, the Disability Resources Centre joined forces with other disability organisations, aged care organisations, unions and environment agencies to form the Transport for All Coalition. Together they strive for a universally accessible public transport system. Elizabeth Drozd has been working in the community services and local government sectors since 1991. She is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Multicultural Community Services, Care Connect's Board Director, and a board member of the Western Region Aged Care Public Fund, which is a charity. In 2022, Elizabeth won Leading Age Services, Australia's Executive Leader Award, for her long history in providing advocacy to support the vulnerable in our community, championing anti-ageism, access to people with language barriers, and training. Elizabeth was a Victorian Multicultural Commissioner from 2008 to 2015. In 2019, she received a scholarship from the Harvard Club of Victoria to participate in Harvard Business School's prestigious Strategic Perspectives non-profit management course in Boston in the United States of America. Jennifer Evans commenced as a Seniors Rights Victoria community speaker in April 2011. A retired social worker, she has experience in the areas of family welfare and health, both in hospital and community settings. Jennifer has worked periodically as a relief advocate with Seniors Rights Victoria, answering calls relating to information about elder abuse and response to people experiencing elder abuse. She thoroughly enjoys the opportunity to meet a range of people to promote the understanding of, response to, and prevention of elder abuse offered through the Seniors Rights Victoria Community Education Group. Fiona York is Executive Officer for the Housing for the Aged Action Group. Fiona has been working with older people for almost 20 years in a variety of roles within the community sector, including elder abuse, community aged care, cultural diversity, and most recently in housing. She has postgraduate qualifications in community development, ethics and legal studies, and brings a social justice perspective to all aspects of her work. She has worked with Housing for the Aged Action Group since 2016 and has been in the Executive Officer role since May 2018, leading the organisation's strong commitment to diversity and advocacy for older people in housing stress. To begin with, I'm going to ask each panel member to speak for around about 5 to 7 minutes about their respective areas and what they would like to see included in the platforms for the Victorian state election. Some of the asks might be in addition, as Chris has mentioned, to the COTA platform, or some might reinforce the COTA platform. I'd just ask for each panel speaker to repeat their area that they're going to talk on before they present. And at the end of each panel speaker, we'll have a little bit of time for people to ask questions in the chat, which I'll solicit from Amanda. So to begin with, I'd invite Ali Scott.
Thank you very much, Gary. So my name is Ali. I'm here from the Disability Resources Centre, and I'm going to talk about accessible public transport. It's very good to see that COTA has issue 3, help Victorians get where they need to go. And I just want to expand on the focus on community transport to the importance of all of our public transport services. We think that public transport should be accessible with urgency. It's non-negotiable, and it's an essential priority for our next government. What does it mean when we say we want access? Well, what this is about is, regardless of your physicality, regardless of your needs, you should be able to access all public services safely, reliably, and independently. So our vision is for universal access on public transport. And this means whether you identify as someone with a disability or whether you're an older person and you might have a sensory or mobility impairment, or you might push a pram, or you may have an injury. This community is a very, very large component of our population. And all these people will benefit from universal access. And if you think that when public transport was first built in 1852, it was all about a hop-on, hop-off service. And the needs of our community have morphed enormously since then, as Chris has already mentioned. And I just want to make a quick nod to Ken's point too, that we've been building a city for cars, not a city for people. And it's time for us to change our course here. And this will also aid our environment agenda, as well as inclusivity. Now, the need for us to change our public transport was seen a long time ago, and I'm sure you all know that a piece of federal legislation was introduced in 2002 called the Disability Standards for Accessible Public Transport, and that set up the standards by which all public transport should be built in order for everybody to be able to use them. Now, there's been no comprehensive audit about how each state has managed to achieve its obligations according to the standards. But in 2020, the Victoria Auditor General's Department did an audit of the Melbourne tram network, and the outcome was damning. They saw that 15% of the tram network is currently accessible. We are so far behind in honouring our obligations. Why is inclusivity important? Well, look, firstly, it's required by law. Not only according to the disability discrimination law are we currently failing our citizens, but it's also all laws are subject to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Inclusivity has enormous economic benefits. Now, interestingly, there's been no governmental modelling around the cost-benefit analysis of inclusion. But we know it to be considerable from the beginning work that VAGO conducted. Similarly, there's been no analysis of the social return on investment. I just want to offer a very small insight into that. It's very hard to get under the skin of what it means to suddenly, or to live with being excluded from your public services, or to suddenly find one day that you can access your public service, but not you. What's that like? Well, a few months ago, one of our campaigners was returning from work in Shepperton. She pre-booked her train the day before, as you have to do if you use a mobility aid. She turned up on the platform, the train arrived. There's no accessible carriage on the console. She simply can't get on the train. So she sits there and the train just passes. And before she can get her phone to ring up and tell her colleagues what's happened, she can't stop crying. Now, this is a woman who makes me sad just to think about it. She's a grown-up, she has children, she has a mortgage, she'd had a really good day. It's so diminishing and erosive, fighting against these barriers every single day. It's not acceptable. Now, the needs of people with a difference are being overlooked here, year on year. So the tram upgrades, for instance, were being achieved with a certain positive rate a few years ago, but they've been slowing down because these needs are being overlooked. And when you think that these are people who are twice as likely to be unemployed, these are people who experience a disproportionate level of poverty and homelessness, these are the people whose needs are being sidelined. Earlier this year, we were in a meeting with the Department of Transport and they said, you know, access on public transport, it's not that bad. Look, I'm sorry. Our government over the last few years has demonstrated a shock of lack of understanding. I just want to, as a final point, talk about the learnings that COVID has given us. And we know that it's taught us a great deal, but one thing is the importance of human connection. And public transport is like the wind between our wings, the wind beneath our wings, I beg your pardon. It connects us to people, to friends, to family, to culture, to community. I could talk about people who can only go and see their family on the other side of Melbourne once a year because that's all they can afford to do in an accessible cab. I can talk to you about people who have to book their social life 2 weeks in advance, again, because they're reliant on cabs. This public transport is essential for everyone. It's part of inclusion. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally, for that. I'd now invite the audience, if they have any questions or comments, to put them in the chat. One of the things that we did talk about earlier when we had our little chat before this forum was the accessibility for people living in regional and rural areas. Would you like to talk a little bit about that as well?
Yes, certainly. So obviously the infrastructure of public transport in regional and rural areas is fairly scarce. And so people are very reliant on wheelchair accessible cabs, which are themselves a scarcity and extremely expensive. I did just mention there at the end that one of our campaigners who says, you know, you have to book it 2 weeks in advance and then it might not come. People who run out of their NDIS provision very, very early on in the year, because it's, in terms of covering transport needs, it just doesn't cut it. So yes, and the assumption is that cabs will pick up the shortfall, but no, it's just not sufficient.
Right, thank you. Okay, all right, well, there doesn't seem to be any questions or comments coming through chat at this stage. I'll just explain to you that once the 4 speakers have finished, we will open it up for general discussion and questions as well. So you'll have an opportunity then to ask any questions about any of these issues. I'd now like to invite Elizabeth to talk about her area, which you'll identify at the beginning. And one of the things I think that is noticeable with the COTA platform is that there isn't very much mention of culturally and linguistically diverse populations.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Gary. So I'm really pleased to be able to present a multicultural perspective on what's been shared by Chris and Ellie. And in relation to the needs of culturally and linguistically diverse communities and how they can be met, it is very much about inclusivity, and I really liked it. It really encapsulates sort of everything. So all the issues and priorities that were identified by Chris, clearly they all relate to ethnic communities and ethnic seniors. some people may actually be affected by all of them or some of them. For example, housing in ethnic communities is actually the higher ownership. There's higher ownership. But clearly they are always people who do not have family support networks. You may be very surprised to hear, and I do have a senior citizens card, so I can actually speak as a senior, although clearly not someone who is experiencing barriers, but some people do. And but I've never had any family in Australia for the last 40 years. So when you actually are here, when you came under the refugee program or special humanitarian program, which is the category I came, we are affected by different issues, and we have to rearrange our lives in a way that can then, hopefully function well in the society. The biggest barrier and need that ethnic seniors experience is really that language issue. If I was speaking to you in my mother tongue, you would not be able to understand what I'm saying. And if I didn't speak English, I would not actually be able to hear and understand and participate in this forum at all. And that means that you don't have access to information, and information is power, and it's just a flow-on effect of that. The language fluency amongst ethnic seniors does vary. For example, in relation to digital inclusion, generally speaking, they are excluded even more. But with some communities, for example, the Asian communities, like Vietnamese community, they actually have a higher usage of the internet than the general population, Anglo-Celtic senior population in Victoria. But they do it in their own language. So again, if information is only available in English, again, that's a barrier. So I'm waiting for the census data to be released. The preliminary information that we have thus far doesn't actually give the information that is needed when it comes to being able to respond to the needs of ethnic communities. So I am told that this will actually happen this month, and that's really important. Where I work, we cannot do our work appropriately and respond to the needs of the communities, despite the fact that we actually specialize in this, without actually reliability and access to good statistical information. No statistics are perfect, but when we make priorities, when we make decisions about which communities we support, the first thing we do is, okay, what are the top 10 CALD senior communities in Victoria, because we are based in Victoria. Despite the fact that the Indian community is the largest community now, and it's a community that doubled in size in the population in the last 5 years between censuses, it's not a community that has the largest number of seniors. So it's really important. So knowledge is very important when we're making decisions about what we can do and how we can better respond in a more equitable and inclusive when it comes to the needs of senior communities, is really knowing that information, because Italian and Greek communities are the largest seniors now from ethnic backgrounds, and that's a reflection of the migration waves that occurred post-Second World War. We still have clients and seniors who we support who came here as displaced persons between 1947 and 53. 170,000 were accepted, which was the largest refugee wave that ever came, compared to 2,500 of people who came in the late 70s and early 80s from Vietnam, known as the boat refugees. So what is the best way to respond to CALD communities being seniors? That's a question that can be asked by every government-funded organization, government departments, and all relevant stakeholders who, certainly from my experience in the last 30 years, there's genuine interest and commitment in wanting to do the right thing, but it can be a bit overwhelming. Ethnic seniors come from more than 200 different communities. They speak more than 100 languages. They follow, and it's all data from census information. They follow more than 140, I think, 3 different faiths and religions. So how do you respond to that? And my message is always the same whenever I'm whenever I'm asked to present about this. So one of the best ways, I believe, is actually to follow what's known as the access and equity principles in relation to cult communities. They are actually applicable to people with disabilities and also, First Nations people. Plus, of course, we do some work with Indigenous organizations and communities. And I know there's another angle always that we need to say, because certainly the First Nations peoples are not people who like to be recognized, and the Indigenous owners of the land that we are gathering on, and normally do not identify as being of ethnic backgrounds. So what are the 7 principles that can be used when we think about the needs of ethnic communities? So first and foremost, are our services and are we accessible as organizations? And does that access result in equity? Not equal access, but equity. Do we know that if 40% of the population is of ethnic backgrounds, let's say seniors, which is where at the moment the statistics is, do our organizations respond and have about 40% of the actual clients or communities that we support? So that's number 1. Number 3 is communication. As we know, communication will always come up. Communication by government departments, by private companies, telephone companies, Optus having a security breach. All of that, in the end, it's the communication. We want to be, kept up to date. We want to be informed so we can make informed choices. Number 4 is responsiveness. And I'm mindful that I've already used 7 minutes, so I won't be long. Responsiveness. So are we responding to and sensitive to the needs of individuals and communities? Number 5 is effectiveness, which is, are we results oriented? Efficiency, are we really optimizing the use of what is known as and available as public resources, and making our services responsive and user-friendly, and etc. And accountability is the last one. Do we really report and do the right thing by the target groups that we are aiming to respond to? So, but first and foremost, we always ask for recognition and awareness that CALD seniors and CALD communities have at times different or additional needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I just, there hasn't been any questions come up yet, but I just wanted to go back to one of those principles that you talked about, which was communication. And I know that having worked with CALD populations, that doesn't necessarily mean a straight translation from an English document into the language. Did you want to talk a little bit about that and what it means when we're talking about being culturally sensitive?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's no organization in Australia, including AMCS, where I work. We cannot provide all information that a person needs. So, sure, we can have these noble decisions made in, ivory towers. And I'm sorry, I work for a not-for-profit. I can be as outspoken as I can. It's all on behalf of advocacy, on behalf of clients. There are these noble decisions and principles and policies. For example, one of them is in relation to, home care and services to support seniors at home, and including in residential care as well, is that clients are entitled and should receive information in a language that they understand. Sure, but at the same time, the government has made a decision that it's all customized and each person receives funding for their care, for example. So one person wanted a contract, 30-page, those contracts prepared by lawyers that, everything has to be included. To translate this was $3,000. It cannot be covered by the funding for that person. No organization can cover, 50 languages and provide that maybe for one person. This person is from Timor-Leste. Her language is, I think, Tangulu. unusual language. Maybe that's the only person we have who speaks that language. So what we do is we constantly struggle every day. We do the best we can, and that's the only thing we can do. And that's the message from Harvard, by the way. For a week, all we listened, because there were 160 CEOs of not-for-profit organizations, and there was recognition of our limited resources. But as long as we do the best we can within the resources that we have, that is all we can do.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'd now like to invite Jennifer Evans, who's going to talk about elder abuse and some of the asks which have already been mentioned by Chris, but to give us a little bit more detail and background about the issue.
Thank you, Gary. Just before I start, I'd like to just say as a volunteer how much I feel very privileged and valued to be part of a team, such an expert team as Seniors Rights Victoria. So elder abuse is any act which causes harm to an older person and is carried out by someone they know and trust, such as family and friends. So the abuse can take a variety of forms, such as emotional, financial, physical, deliberate neglect, and other. So, and any older person, both men and women of any income level, of any cultural group, may become a victim of abuse. But many clients find it difficult to take action because the perpetrator is part of their family. The abuse can continue over a long period of time, and it can range from minor through to extreme mistreatment. Now, most clients might not have had any direct personal experience of abuse previously, which can make them feel very isolated and unaware that what is happening actually constitutes a form of elder abuse. The surveys have shown that between 12 and 15% of Australians over the age of 65 years have experienced some form of elder abuse. Now, if we applied this to Victoria, the number of people who have experienced some form of elder abuse would be about around 100 to 160,000 people. Big number. So elder abuse is a form of family violence, but the 2015 Victorian Royal Commission into Family Violence recognised that elder abuse can be different from intimate partner violence, as it's often perpetrated by adult children and so requires a specialised approach. Now, operating since 2008, Seniors Rights Victoria is the only integrated legal and advocacy service specialising in elder abuse that covers the whole state. So it offers free, timely and expert legal advice and support to any older person experiencing abuse. It has a role in policy and advocacy, capacity building, and working collaboratively with relevant sectors across the community to better identify, address and prevent elder abuse. Now, in the broader community, it raises awareness of ageism, which is the main driver of elder abuse. And this is where the community educators, such as myself, have a role. Now, in doing so, Seniors Rights Victoria recognises that every older Victorian has the right to live with dignity and respect, including making their own choices about what action to take to stop the abuse. As one client said, being able to talk to someone gave me the power to make decisions. Now, as Chris said earlier, SRV is struggling for adequate funding to meet demand. The current casework staffing level funded by the Victorian government is 5 full-time positions, the same level as it was in 2012. Hardly adequate to meet the needs of those older Victorians who are being abused and mistreated in some way by their family. Now, the number of calls to the Seniors Rights Helpline has increased significantly as the service has become better known, and so has the complexity of the cases. Responding well to an older person takes time and expertise, but the increasing demand on the helpline for assistance and support means that staff are often under pressure to respond immediately, so they're limited in tailoring their response to value the older person and rebuild their confidence. When it works well, in the words of another client, she put my mind at rest and provided a lot of empathy. She understood, gave me a lot of advice and a lot of time. So this specialised approach is important. There's also a huge unmet need in rural and regional areas. As currently, the research shows that 70 to 80% of calls to the helpline come from the metro area. So what would additional and sustained core funding provide? Well, it would increase the number of specialist staff from 5 full-time positions to 10 full-time positions in the first year, and then increase incrementally as demand for its services increases. This funding will enable a more prompt response to those experiencing elder abuse. It would increase and improve the response for those from diverse populations and regional and rural areas. It would allow an additional worker dedicated to promoting the prevention of elder abuse, ensure older people across the whole of Victoria are aware of their rights. Now, additional core funding would continue and expand the work in policy and systemic advocacy, capacity building, and stakeholder engagement. And I know this is an area in particular that Gary works so hard with all of the other agencies to build their capacity to understand and respond to elder abuse. It would allow additional administrative staff to support the work of the lawyers, advocates, and policy staff to engage directly related to responding to the needs of older Victorians, thus ensuring their rights are protected and the prevalence of elder abuse in the community is reduced. So, as Chris said earlier, what we're asking for, we need the current members of government and all candidates in the upcoming state election to know that elder abuse does occur in our community, and that the only statewide integrated legal and advocacy service specialising in elder abuse, Seniors Rights Victoria, is currently grossly underfunded to meet the need. Seniors Rights Victoria needs an immediate increase in sustained core funding from the new state government so that they can improve and extend the response to elder abuse in the community and to fulfil its role advocating for the rights of older Victorians. Back to you, Gary.
Thanks, Jennifer. And that's been very informative background information in terms of the asks around Seniors Rights Victoria, but also in expanding the advocacy, which is really important in reducing elder abuse in Victoria. I mean, one of the things that we do know is that with family violence is that 20 to 30 years ago, intimate partner violence would be a matter for the family and no one else would be getting involved, including the police. And we know today, for example, that our awareness of family violence in that context and our unacceptability of it has increased enormously through awareness raising and campaigns and that sort of thing. Can you see elder abuse being at that point where people do have an increased awareness across the broader community if the funding is increased?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting when we go out to talk to community groups, and we're starting to do that again now after a big lull during the COVID period. People now, you know, we used to ask years ago, has anybody heard of seniors' rights? Has anybody heard of elder abuse? And people would, very few people would respond. Whereas now I think we are hearing a little bit more. We will have people put up their hands to say that they have heard of seniors' rights. And generally, there'll always be someone that comes up after the talk to give an example of either where they've been involved and or where they know a family member has been. But this is a very specialised group that we usually talk to. I mean, there is, and I know you're doing some work with the deaf community at the moment. So there's whole different segments of the community that really just haven't understood that what they're experiencing is elder abuse and that there is help in hand. And I think, obviously, the more that message can get out there, the more staff that Seniors Rights has, that you're duplicated, that the rest of your staff are duplicated, then the needs of those people are going to be met much better.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. I'd now like to invite Fiona York, the CEO of HAG, to present on the housing issue.
Thanks, Gary. It's lovely to be here, and I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land today, the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and to note that homelessness and housing insecurity disproportionately affects Aboriginal elders. As Gary mentioned, my name is Fiona York. I'm the Executive Officer of Housing for the Aged Action Group. We're known as HAG. We're a member-based organisation that's been around since 1983, working towards housing justice for older people. And we run the Home at Last service, which is a housing information service for people aged 50 years and older. We're one of only 2 specialist older persons housing services in the country. Around 60% of our clients are older women, and around 50% are from a culturally and linguistically diverse background. I'd like to congratulate COTA Victoria for including the issue of housing in their election demands for the upcoming state election. It's so important because having secure and affordable housing underpins everything. It's vital for health and well-being, and it's impossible to age well or age in place without appropriate housing. It impacts on social connections. Elder abuse is both is caused by insecure housing, and housing is a solution to elder abuse in a lot of cases as well. The housing crisis for older people in Victoria is getting worse. Every day, our Home at Last service receives calls for people across the state who are facing eviction, are unable to pay the rent, who are experiencing inappropriate and housing due to their families' inability to hold them any longer as well. There's been a steep increase in the number of older people experiencing homelessness, as Chris mentioned at the outset, including older women. And we've just had a look in the last couple of days at the 2021 census data, which shows that there are more than 160,000 people aged 55 and older who are renting in Victoria. Older people need stable and affordable housing in order to age in place, and this can't occur in the private rental sector at the moment with our current housing laws and with the current cost of housing. At the moment, it's only 22 months, the average length of the tenancy in metropolitan Melbourne, and only 1% of available rental housing is affordable to someone on the age pension. So it's just not a viable option for older people to age in place. There's a really stark difference in the health and well-being of older people who are homeowners versus those who are renters. And if you look at COTA's State of the Older Nation report, you can see that older renters are more likely to rate their quality of life as poor. They feel older. They're more financially insecure and worried about paying the bills. They're less likely to have superannuation or private health insurance, and they're also less likely to exercise their rights or make complaints. Unfortunately, Victoria still has the lowest proportion of public housing stock in Australia. So we are 100% supporting the calls of COTA Victoria and VCOS to increase the supply of community and public housing to 60,000 over the next 10 years. We think that that is absolutely essential. As well as increasing the housing supply, there's a couple of other things that we're asking the Victorian government to do. One of them is to release the 10-year affordable housing strategy. And this was a new long-term approach the government announced last year to address housing supply, and most importantly, to put housing as a human right in the centre of our housing system. But unfortunately, it was shelved earlier in the year following backlash from the Property Council on a proposed levy for low-cost housing. And I noticed this morning that there's been some further announcements around that, which hopefully will be a good sign. But we really support a long-term view and support a 10-year affordable housing strategy. So we hope that the Victorian government will be now able to release that. Last year, I gave evidence alongside COTA Victoria to the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry into Homelessness. That report has been released, but the government has not yet responded to it within the 6 months required. So we're really hoping that the Victorian government can respond to the recommendations in that report. They heard over 300 submissions from across the state. Not all of it was about older people, but older people were certainly represented. Similarly, we made a number of submissions to the Social Housing Regulation Review, which was an independent review into the social housing sector. It has also released a report and it recommends a range of reforms that put tenants in the centre of the system. However, this too has not yet been responded to by government. The Victorian Ombudsman has been damning in her review of the complaint system for social housing, and she calls the system broken. One of her recommendations is that a housing ombudsman be established, and this is one of the things that we are also calling for. We'd like that to be extended, though, to include not just residents of public and community housing, but also residents of retirement housing, including both retirement villages and residential parks, who have been asking for an ombudsman since the parliamentary inquiry in 2015. Dispute resolution in residential parks and retirement villages is fraught, it's difficult, it's expensive, it's long-winded, it's very hard for residents to exercise their rights. And so it's really important that an ombudsman can address those issues in that type of housing. We recently held a forum for residential park residents, and for those that may not be aware, residential parks are where the resident owns the dwelling, but they lease the land that it sits on by paying site fees. This type of housing is currently falling through the gaps of the Retirement Villages Act and the Residential Tenancies Act. And there are many issues in this sector that we're hoping that the Victorian government can have a look at in the coming term. The other major issue for older people and housing that we see is what we're calling the missing middle, which is older people, mainly older women, who have a small amount of savings or superannuation, which makes them ineligible for public and community housing, but they're unable to afford anything else. We don't have any data on this, the number of people that this affects. We have a lot of people coming to our service who fall into this category, but we're not sure across the population how many people this affects. And so what we're asking for is that part of the big housing build announcement that the Victorian government has promised for affordable housing, which they're thinking of as key worker housing, be earmarked for, around 20% be earmarked for that cohort of older women, particularly, who are falling through the gaps of the system. At the moment, when they call our service, there's very few options that we can give them. They're sitting in private rental, depleting their savings and unable to access any other type of housing. And it's really, it's very bleak for that cohort. So overall, what we're calling for is a range of options that address the needs of low-income older people. The housing needs to be well designed, it needs to be adaptive to climate change, and it needs to be in places where people want to live, connected to their communities, to transport, to green spaces, to services. And that's the only thing that will prevent the incoming tide of homelessness for older people that we're seeing. The other thing that we're calling for is an expansion of our Home at Last service. We currently provide information to around 1,000 older Victorians every year, and we assist around 150 older people into long-term affordable housing, mainly in metropolitan Melbourne, but more recently into the Shepparton and Barwon regions as well. So we would like to expand that service so we can support more people in all parts of Victoria to find housing and connect them with services. We have an election strategy on our website, ofthetenants.org.au, and we're calling on people to join us in our campaign for better housing in the upcoming election and better services for older people, and also to combat ageism. So if anyone, if this sounds like somebody you know, or you yourself are in housing stress, please feel free to get in contact with us and we can have a chat about housing options. I'll give the phone numbers out at the end or in the chat potentially, but obviously, if anyone is feeling uncertain about the future or their housing issues, please get in contact with Home at Last. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Fiona. That's been very informative. Look, you might have mentioned this and I might have missed it, but did you talk about the issue of older women who have been subjected to family violence, looking for housing and not being able to find it, and then not having any options? And if you haven't, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so family violence is obviously one of the drivers of homelessness. It is a priority category on the Victorian Housing Register, which means that if you're experiencing family violence, you should be getting priority. Same with people who are 55 years and older. However, at the moment, the wait time for people is around 15 months to get into housing. And so that is a big issue. People basically have no options. And then even worse for older women who don't meet that criteria because they have too many assets, too much superannuation, then they really have nowhere to go. So it's a major issue, which is why we're calling on some type of affordable housing strategy, whether it be co-housing, whether it be cooperatives, whether it be a revitalisation of the independent living unit sector, which has been sold off. It needs to be something to address the needs of those older women.
Thanks very much. Excuse me. So there have been some questions that have come through during the panel presentations, and I might get some of you to address those now. There was one question which talked about in recent years, a genuine effort to engage and improve public transport by a COTA representative on various reference groups. The improvements are often budget limited, and the question is, how do we best ensure we are prioritising the actions for disability correctly? Ali, do you want to talk to that?
Yes, great. Thank you. Wonderful question. Yes, there is a budget for small upgrades, and it's always worth filtering through if there's a particular local issue that you have. They tend to, the Department of Transport can deal with those fairly quickly. But in terms of the broader agenda, the only answer is lobbying. So last year, a group of complainants, including an older Victorian, took a case to VCAT about inaccessibility of public transport. It came to nothing. So our complaint process is broken, and lobbying is all we have. So the potential for all of our campaigning communities that we have here at this meeting today to come together and force the government to take notice of their legal obligations and do the upgrade work required across the board is what we want to see. We've got a letter writing campaign which we're launching this afternoon leading up to the election, and we'd really love your participation. If you have a moment, that will be on our website this afternoon.
Great, thanks, Sally. And what we might do is get you to flick the details of that to Amanda, and then she can circulate it. Would that be okay, Amanda? I'm saying it's okay anyway. Okay, so moving on to another question. One of the things that came up during the presentation around culturally and linguistically diverse populations, Elizabeth, was the issue of internet access, and how this, you did talk about, for example, how the older Vietnamese population had a significant usage of the internet, but I would imagine that that's the exception, and that, for seniors in a lot of instances who are from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, their internet access may be limited by a whole range of reasons, including language and budget. Do you want to talk to that question as well?
Yes, thank you. So certainly very relevant, and I know it has emerged as an issue where people who are on pensions and pensions only, and that applies to any senior, and may have significant health needs. For example, that means that they really need to be very careful with what they use the pension money for. Having the internet subscription that came up as an issue during the digital inclusion projects that we've been running, and we've certainly really increased it significantly when COVID started. We were aware of the barriers that existed before. We were fortunate to get some funds from a charitable trust, right, who really supported it, and that resulted in 80 bilingual digital mentors for seniors. Right. Including some of our staff volunteered. So that was absolutely amazing. It is doable. Clearly, we cannot do everything on a voluntary basis. Sometimes there are some funds needed to facilitate and tap into the goodwill that exists in multicultural communities and the general community. And so it was absolutely great. Normally project funding and charitable funding is normally for a year or a bit longer. Be Connected is a fantastic initiative, and again, we are part of that. We're continuing that process, and it's absolutely great when a CALD senior starts with needing a whole table to operate the mouse, and they are given an A4 piece of paper and saying, this is your space for the mouse. And, you know, to then for me to get emails from them and for them to be active on Facebook. I mean, the satisfaction from actually connecting someone, you know, to actually the digital world is absolutely fantastic. So whatever we can do, but yeah, it's so that's what it is. But certainly and lucky, there is some flexibility, and again, that's the benefit of COVID, the flexibility that governments have put in place regarding some of the funding that exists, where in fact we as a service provider could actually purchase an iPad or a phone for a senior and then have a digital mentor volunteer to help them with that process. And in fact, it is actually possible, for example, with the home care package funding to actually pay for someone in a paid capacity to actually support a senior to be able to increase their independence and empowerment to be able to function. The interest has to be there, of course. We do have some seniors who actually don't even want to have a mobile phone and they still have a landline. So there's only so much you can do. Some seniors don't take to it. And I can completely understand that. There's just so much that's gone online that even people my age, it just feels a bit much, really.
Yes.
And it can be overwhelming, of course.
Yes, agreed. I agree with you totally. Okay. So one of the things that came up while you were talking, Fiona, a person commented on that they were very impressed with all your data. And that we should be taking the needs of and solutions of homeless people more seriously. Do you think one of the solutions is to appoint a minister to help work for this solution? Maybe a minister for homelessness or someone who's specifically appointed to address that issue?
Yeah, federally, there's a homelessness minister. On a state level, there's the housing minister, recently come into the position with Richard Wynn's departure. So it's definitely in his ballpark to be looking at these things. I think one of the challenges is that the sector and the older people themselves and anybody that's experienced homelessness in the past knows the solutions. We have the solutions. It's just about the political will to implement those solutions. So rather than reinventing the wheel and coming up with yet another innovation, we know what works. What we need to do is pressure those decision makers to put it at the top of their priority list and see housing and safe and affordable housing as underpinning everything to do with health and well-being and social connections and all of those things. We really saw that in COVID. People suddenly realised how important it was to have housing, and we could all of a sudden get all of the rough sleepers off the street into hotels pretty much overnight. So if there's a lever, then people will act, but otherwise it's just not prioritised. So the more people speaking about it and talking about this issue to government and recognising the importance of it underpinning for all health and wellbeing and ageing in place and home care packages and all of the things that we've discussed today are underpinned by safe and affordable housing.
Sure. Look, just this will be the last question because we have to move on in a minute. But there was a question around elder abuse and how can we ensure that it's taken more seriously by other places and other organisations and agencies. And the question was really about how can we ensure that incidences are acted on promptly by politicians, policymakers, the police, court system, health professional and others, and what can we as ordinary about advocacy and awareness. So Jennifer, what I might do is get you to answer the latter part of that question, which is what can we do as ordinary members in the community to support the advocacy and awareness. And I might just flag with Chris that maybe he could talk about the first part of that question, which related to getting others to respond more promptly. So Jennifer, over to you.
Yeah, look, it is about awareness, isn't it? I guess the work that we do in talking to seniors groups, that's very much about awareness and making sure they know that there are pamphlets and booklets to give to their neighbours, to encourage their family members, etc., to do, you know, to let them know that there is help out there. And it's being aware of the issues, and I guess it's all the issues we've been covering today, having them ready to talk about. I'll just give one quick incident, and I know we're going to talk more about how do we lobby for all of these things. But last week I had a call from my local state member's office to, you know, they're doing the rounds saying, what are the issues for the upcoming election? So he got me at a good spot. As one, first up, I gave him full barrel on one topic I won't go into today. But then I said, I'm on a panel next week. Is he aware, you know, of elder abuse? Will they be involved, etc.? So I suspect the guy I spoke to didn't have a clue about elder abuse and didn't really know about seniors' rights. However, yesterday I did send the link and the information about today's COTA event to the local member. And I got an email back this morning to say, thanks for that. Yes, we are aware. We have lots of people coming in about elder abuse, and they have close, because it's at Box Hill, they have close connections with the Eastern Legal Service that has a speciality in elder abuse. So it is being aware that at every opportunity, you know, they will be phoning us. So we talk about housing, we talk about disability, we talk about, you know, cold issues, and we talk about elder abuse. So it's taking opportunities to spread the word to whoever.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. Chris, did you want to make some comments about the other part of that question, which was how do we get policymakers and politicians to respond promptly to incidences of elder abuse? And you're on mute at the moment.
Yes, thanks, Gary. And it's a really, really great question from Lynn. And it's not a simple question by any means. There are so many components to that we could break down and talk probably for the remainder of this time. But if you look at, I'll give you an example. When Lynn asked the question, and I'll break this up if I can. You know, we'll get to politicians and policymakers in a minute. But if we focus on the police, court system, health professionals, and others, I think there needs to be an understanding that in Victoria in particular, and probably more broadly nationally, we don't have what you would refer to as integrated justice services. Integrated justice services, you know, there could be a plethora of organisations and entities that represent a lot of those areas of the court systems and you know, drug and alcohol, mental health, you know, all these other professional organisations, like-minded organisations that work in the same system. So elder abuse, if that's the starting point, you know, and then the police and all the other entities that get involved. If it's an integrated, collaborative service that assesses every step of that abuse and how it's dealt with, then there is a lot more awareness and a lot more policy change and law changes. At the moment, we don't have anything like that. We have a very small version of that in central Melbourne and Collingwood, but it's a tiny little precinct that probably no one knows about. So Elizabeth would know when I was in Wyndham. I was a CEO in Wyndham there, and for a fairly powerful little lobbying group, and I advocated and chaired, you know, the Wyndham Integrated Justice Precinct Advisory Group. That took, you know, 4 years to get that group up and running and get the decision makers, the politicians, to actually support that. And how did I do that? To answer the next question from Lynn, you know, we did that by, you know, we engaged a university. They did a very comprehensive evidence-based study, Deakin University, on the lack of integrated justice precinct services in Wyndham in particular. And that was a very, very confrontational study by Deakin University. So what did I do with it as the CEO of the lobbying group that I was running on behalf of the community? I went to the Attorney General, to the ministers, to all the other politicians, and I said, in about 2 weeks, we're going to go public with this. We're going to be very overt in our language, in our media releases in relation to the damning findings of this study. So that overt lobbying strategy and engagement, which Ali touched on, Elizabeth touched on as well. When you talk about like-minded entities, like are here today in this very important event, it's very, very important that, you know, there's a collective, collaborative approach to addressing these things. Okay. And the second part, or the first part of that question, Lynn, you know, go to your local MP. And I couldn't imagine a better time than right now to do that. Okay. They're just about, you know, we're at the precipice now. We're in October. They're going to go into caretaker mode very, very soon. Okay. Then probably a week or 2 weeks away from caretaker mode. So you have a very short window to really make sure that your MPs are actually doing their job. Okay. So that's, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks very much. That's been very helpful. Okay, look, that finishes the panel discussion and questions. I think if there is one takeaway from this, it's that we need to lobby and we need to raise awareness about the issues. And the way to do that is through a number of means. I mean, Ali's talked about a letter writing campaign, and certainly at the end of this forum, there will be information about how we can take the platform forward to the candidates for the next state election. And it sort of segues into the next section. And I'm going to, before I do that, I should thank all our panelists for coming along today and for giving your time. It's been very informative, and it's been inspirational as well in terms of energising the group, I think, to take these matters on board. Okay, what I'd like to do now is to introduce Emma King, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Victorian Council of Social Services. Emma joined the Victorian Council of Social Services, VCOS, in 2013, providing a strong voice of leadership and advocacy on social justice issues for the community sector. Emma was previously Chief Executive Officer of the Early Learning Association Australia, formerly Kindergarten Parents Victoria, the peak organisation representing parents and providers of early learning services in Victoria. Emma also has an extensive background in the public sector and in workforce and education issues, having worked as a Victorian policy advisor, a teacher, and in a range of industrial and training roles at the Victorian Independent Education Union and the Finance Sector Union. Emma's qualifications include a Master's in Industrial and Employee Relations, a Graduate Diploma of Education, and a Bachelor of Arts. Emma is a regular commentator on social affairs and will guide us on how to advocate to your MPs or political candidates on issues of importance to you. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you for a very kind introduction indeed. If I can begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I am on today. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, so I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and to emerging leaders, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. If I can also acknowledge Gary and Chris in particular, the panellists. I just had the pleasure of hearing the synergies, I think, that we're all, a number of things that we're collectively working on, and all of you who are here today. It's great to be with you. So I've been asked to speak about how do you advocate to MPs on issues that are important to you? And my understanding is that a number of people online are here as individuals, others are part of organisations. So I've tried to kind of tailor accordingly, but of course, you know, feel free to flag if there's something that I kind of haven't covered enough or anything along those lines as well. And there'll always be some things that you are more than across, particularly having heard the conversation that we've just had now, and other things that might be, you know, kind of something to think about a little bit as well. I think from an overarching point of view, I've just assumed that, you know, people kind of know who their MPs are and where they are and all those sorts of things as well. And I guess I wanted to flag as a first point, remembering as well that MPs are inundated. They've got people flooding their offices every single day, let alone if your MP is a minister as well. You know, they are incredibly busy. They and their staff are really, they're stretched, but they are generally very integrated into their local communities. And I think it's pretty rare to find an MP and their office who are not really in touch with their local communities as well. So in terms of, I guess my point around that was it's almost that the aspect around how to get cut through, because if you're, I reckon, a member of parliament or one of their staff, you've got people flooding through your door every day from everything like I don't know how to sign on to the power saving bonus. How can you help me to, I don't have anywhere to sleep tonight, to, you know, I've got an issue with my NDIS issue. So they've kind of got a bit of everything coming their way. So in terms of how to get cut through in what's a very noisy space, some of the things that I started to think about, and I can see Karen Taranto, if I can just acknowledge Karen as well. Karen's one of our policy stars at VCOS and has been part of the process of some of the things that we've worked through. And if you've got questions later, we might sort of share them and join in together. But I know some of this will sound really simple, but I reckon it's harder than what it is. And that is when you've got an issue, you know, if there's a key issue or your election platform or something that you're working to put forward, it's being really clear about what it is, why does it matter, for whom is it for? So in some cases, it will be a personal thing that you're trying to get cut through. It might be that you've got issues with your aged care package. You don't know who else to go to. You've gone to your local MP and you want them to help you. In other cases, it'll be because there's an election platform and you're looking at how can you kind of push it across and how can you get traction. Around the benefit, and I think one of the key, it's being very tangible, because otherwise you get an MP who says, well, you've come to me, you've got a complaint, but I don't actually know, I'm not really sure what it is and I don't actually know what to do about it, because some of the issues we've got, they're really big, they're wicked problems, they've been around for a long while. So there's that part around saying, well, actually, this is what I want you to do about it. And I do think that piece about being succinct, it's really, really important. So having your elevator pitch and having your elevator pitch ready to go. And, you know, can you describe what your issue is in 100 words or 200 words? And I look at Karen on the screen as I say this, because when we did the VCOS election platform, we had absolute rigor around every ask where they had a 200-word limit. And when we did our budget platform, 100-word limit for each ask that we had. So we know that we could write this kind of Bible that would have everything in it, but actually it's so big and it looks so complicated that people aren't going to read it. So it's been really succinct and sharp around ideas. Going to the point of sort of what Chris mentioned before, that power of evidence, the data and evidence, and I think that combining it with personal stories as well is really powerful, because different things will have an impact on different people. So, but we're always told to look for an evidence base. For any of us from the community sector, we know one of our challenges is whenever we're funded for a program, etc., we're not funded to collect the evidence base. So it can be quite hard sometimes to show the evidence we want, or alternatively, it's evidence that's collected over time. And to draw on early childhood, for example, there's this no-brainer research by Nobel Prize winning economists that show every dollar that you put in, what it saves down the track and the long-term benefits. But that doesn't fall within one electoral cycle. But in saying that, we've seen some announcements more recently around the Family Violence Royal Commission and the Mental Health Royal Commission, and notwithstanding the fact that we have a significant need for housing, the big housing build, that actually go well beyond one term of government. So we are seeing a bit of a shift in that front. But I think no matter what, it's that piece about keeping an eye on the end game. And people have different views about this, whether it's sort of transactional or relational, if you like, in terms of how we engage with MPs. I personally think it's relational. I enjoy building relationships with people. I enjoy having, I want to be able to test ideas out, because often through being able to talk through things, you might be able to find a different solution or one that might work that perhaps you hadn't contemplated in the first place. Lots of other things in terms of, if you're going in around an election platform or something along those lines, you want to get a photo and you want to tweet it out and all those sorts of things as well. So thinking about how you use that. Going to a comment that was made earlier as well, and that is, do you have allies? So, and I say this in terms of whether it's organisational or individual, because is it an issue for yourself? And some issues will be. They will be issues that are very personal around particular things that are happening to you or your family. But also, if that's the case, it often means similar things are happening for other people as well. Or is it an organisational issue? I think there's a piece here that's really strong about where you join, where we collectively, I say we because we certainly do this at VCOS, about where we join efforts and where we join together, and about the strength in numbers, and also not being divided and conquered along the way. So I'll come to that a little bit more. But in terms of thinking more broadly about what groups do you belong to, what other organisations might you be a member of, how you build those coalitions for change. And I'll give you a couple of very quick examples. One is in my previous role when I was a CEO of Early Learning Association. We wanted to make sure that we were talking to VCOS as we were developing our budget asks and our election asks. And I really wanted to see them reflected in the VCOS platform, because I thought it shows that we're talking to one another. It shows that our links are the same, and it also might mean that it's going to get to people that I wouldn't, when in my previous role, I wouldn't have had a direct line to in the way that I do in my current role. So, and that was well before this job was on the table. But it's looking to build, I think, sometimes unusual coalitions for change as well. So we're doing quite a lot of work at the moment with Chamber of Commerce and Industry, environment groups, others that are maybe outside of some of the groups that we would have traditionally worked with in the same way. And there is definite power in being able to do that. And it changes who you have discussions with. And it also changes, one of the things that I've learned is having some really great people from very different organisations, when we're listening to them, when we're understanding each other, they're sometimes some of our greatest allies when we're going into meetings or they're talking to ministers and others themselves. And it's been really effective. So anyone who's seen Chamber of Commerce led a process, it was called the Victorian Summit, looking for a Victorian 2050, and brought together a group of unusual players to be in the same room and landed this long-term vision. And can I be upfront? It included Trades Hall, Chamber of Commerce and Industry, ourselves, others, and then there was a number of people who were on a steering group. I'm not pretending we all agreed on everything, because we didn't, but we were able to put forward a number of issues that people had identified and asterisks, the ones where people had different views. We had a document we could all be comfortable with at the end of the day. The other example I'd give, and one that Karen has a lot of connection with, is we've got a group called the Housing Peaks Alliance. So it's particularly for groups that are peaks. It's a limited membership. There's only sort of 6 members in there. But one of the things we are really mindful of is that it's very easy, going to points that Fiona's made around some of the issues for housing. When we look at groups such as the Public Tenants Association, the Community Housing Association, Council for Homeless Persons and others, it's very easy for us all to go in with a group of different asks and present them to a minister who looks at them and says, fundamentally, what am I meant to do with this? I've got 6 or 7 groups, they're all coming in with something different. Like, I don't know what I'm meant to do with that. We work very, very hard behind the scenes, and it is behind the scenes, to get on the same page, to look at where we can synchronise our asks, and also to have a degree of candour about where there is going to be difference because something is a deal breaker for an organisation, and we work to understand that. But we know that by going forward together, there's just greater strength in how that we can do that. And part of that is trust that's built up over time. And I can remember, anyway, I could talk about that one for a long while, but I do think it's a really powerful example of coming together and where and why you can do that, because it takes time and it takes effort and it takes trust. But for me, I want the discussions of, if you like, of if there's conflict, I want it to be behind closed doors. We can have a good contest of ideas, and I want us having a really great forward-facing document that actually articulates what do we collectively want. And it just brings so much more power with it. I think one of the other things that I'm mindful of, just building on some comments that maybe Chris made before, is that sometimes it's about what conversations do you have behind closed doors, that sometimes for us, some of the biggest wins, people won't know that we've been there, to be frank, but it doesn't matter, because it's actually about what is our principle and what are we here for and what are we here to achieve. And so for me, sometimes it's about what are the conversations you have behind closed doors, where someone's trusted you enough to bring you in and ask for your opinion, and they might have done something that actually might have involved them backing down on something or changing their mind, and they want to look at how they control a narrative around that. I'm fine with that as a general rule. I don't care. I just am interested in the outcome. There are other things that we are much more overt about. So I think it depends on, to me, on what the issue is and where you are. But again, I say this as someone who's running an organisation rather than as an individual. But I think you know, there's that part around looking at how do you play along the way, keeping your eye on this is our end game, and this is where we want to get to. What's the best way of getting there? Because it's not about having a big win that I need to go and celebrate and take all the credit for. It's actually about how do we get to the place that we want to be in. And I've definitely learned lessons along the way on that front as well, where each time you do something like, yeah, I might do a little bit of that differently next time. And again, to me, that comes to part of the value of relationships, because you know where there's particular sensitivities for people as well, and you want to respect that and be mindful, because we all know how you make someone feel is really important, and it's going to make such a big impact on the next time that you're engaging with them again, and being a person that hopefully that they feel that they can trust and they can, and that they want to work with as well. In terms of looking as well, some of the things that have really struck me, particularly in my 9 years at VCOS, is sometimes we have like those short-term wins, and others are a really long, they're a long game, and it's sticking in it for the long run. So when I think back to, and apologies given I'm a COTA event and looking at early childhood, but when I was at ALA, Early Learning Association Australia, we were advocating for 3-year-old kindergarten, and I was told multiple times that we were dreaming, we had to stop it, we needed to stop talking about it, it was really annoying. And now we've got free 3-year-old kindergarten, and we've seen a more recent announcement where we've got actually Victoria is now going to be running 50 childcare centres that are intentionally placed in childcare deserts. There's free 3-year-old kindergarten, and there's considerably expanded 4-year-old kindergarten. And again, we've been advocating for a lot of that behind the scenes, but it's, to me, the point of don't give up. Like, the evidence was in and we had to keep going. But in saying that, it was a really interesting example where we draw the parallel of saying, you know, we almost, at the end, what we asked for seemed really big, but it was like we asked for a scooter and then we ended up with this really good bike at the end of the day. So it's just kind of sticking in for the long game. I thought I'd touch just very briefly on the VCOS process for anyone who's interested, just as a high overview. And some of you will have been involved in this along the way as well. In terms of our election platform, we start really early. So we start a survey amongst our member organisations. Last year, I think we would have done the survey to ask people, look, what are your kind of top issues, etc. as well. We then had member consultations earlier this year, just to tease out issues more broadly, and then some one-on-one, consultations with people, again, to tease things out in a little bit more detail. Alongside that, as we were crafting our document, we met with a group of, we went through and teased out our kind of wish list of external organisations and people we'd like to talk to who aren't normally in our, might not be in our kind of ordinary ecosystem, like a number of economists and health professionals, and just a raft of other people who are interesting, they're experts at what they do, and they deal in their field in a different way to the way that we field in ours. So we wanted to stress test to say, well, this is what we're asking for. Do you reckon it's right? Or do you reckon that we've missed something? Or what do you think? And it's interesting to me about how many of them we've actually been able to continue. Firstly, everyone said yes. People were very generous with their time. It's built longer enduring relationships with a range of different people for whom, we had some engagement with, but it's now, I would say, a deeper engagement. And it has definitely influenced our election platform, because we've got a sense about going, hey, do you know ex-ministers looking at this? We might be like, no, we didn't actually, but we do now. So we're going to you might just craft something or frame it in a slightly different way. And that was something that I think helped enormously. Karen was part of the team that, as I said, it was then about, it's really easy to write really long documents that have got tons of stuff in them about why something's important, because we know things are important. And when you work in the fields that we all do, it's hard to not feel emotional about that as well, because it is really emotional. When you've just spoken to someone who's deeply impacted on the ground in a frontline situation, then you've got to distill it back into like a quick ask in a document. I reckon there's a lot of rigor involved in that. So being able to distill that into a quick ask that someone can see, and keeping in mind, we cut across almost every minister. So we've got to be really mindful in how we do that in a way that's going to cut through and not be so big that someone puts it down and they just don't read it fundamentally as well. We then craft our document as well, and we build an engagement and an advocacy platform, and we intentionally curate that to different audiences. So we've got a list of people that we will write to and we will see, and we'll intentionally make meetings and etc. with. Many of them are obviously ministers, but some of them are a different audience as well, because we know that they have influence and impact on ministers and the Premier and others as well. And I should say, as we were developing up our platform as well, we did feed ideas through to the Premier's office and to others, because we know their decision making starts really early. It's not like it's really, I'm sure most of their election promises they've already decided, and they decided them months ago. In the same way that for budget, we know they've made their decisions as a general rule by about Jan, if not earlier. And the notion that people are going in with their budget asks in April from May budget, like, it's done and dusted. Unless something happens, it's actually kind of amazing that people go, actually, and things do happen at the last minute, because they definitely do. But as a general rule, it's already done. So we were very intentional about feeding things in as we went, and particularly as we were working through. And I should say as well, also working with a crossbench and also working with opposition on that front as well. It's not just ministers on that front as well. And then having a comms strategy, and that piece about how you get cut through. And I'll just use one example, because it was something that I loved, and I have to give credit to Ryan Shields, who is our communications director, but he had to convince me last time around doing an election advent calendar. And I was a bit worried, because I worry that our members will see this and they'll think that we're wasting their money, because we've put out this, literally, you'd open one of the 25 doors, you'd open one for each day of the 25 days leading up to the election. And under each one was, you had chocolate and an ask. And it was hilarious in that it got this incredible cut through. We had people from Neil Mitchell and others filming them opening the ask, and I probably shouldn't describe it, actually, people who did it, and they sent it to us discreetly to say, and it meant that they looked at what our asks were in a way that I don't think it would have got cut through otherwise. So Ryan was pretty creative in thinking about how do we get people to look at it who they're really busy, they don't have time to look at this, they're not going to read through a written document, they're just not, as a general rule. How might we get people to have a look and go, you know what, that's funny and that's a bit clever, about different ways of getting messages across as well. So I flagged that alongside, obviously, the importance of social media as well as traditional media and other things. We just try and cut across the lot. And it was that when I say to the advent calendars, we ran out last time because we had so many people asking for more, including MPs. And we were doing another MP forum at our AGM later this month. And we had all of the MPs and their advisors saying, but can we have some more? And which made me laugh, because we only ordered like 50, still really mindful around the cost and all those sorts of things. But we've just done our order for the next one and gone, we'll put in some more. But it kind of highlights, here's our top 25 and here's how we try and get cut through to different audiences, because it's not like we're only speaking to our members of parliament, we're actually speaking to other key influencers. So our journalists, the people who are on prime time on our radios, all those sorts of people as well, because they will also have a very big impact, obviously, on what we can progress with our members of parliament. And the other thing I'd also just say in kind of closing, that importance of always acknowledging, and I think everyone here knows that, but acknowledging and thanking our members of parliament when they're working with us. We know that a lot of them, the other thing I would say is we know that a lot of them will agree. When you're talking about things like elder abuse, etc., I think it'd be pretty hard to find any MP who didn't acknowledge that was a significant issue. It's the what to kind of do about it, which is where we need to work together. But that piece around acknowledging, where often people are working very hard to work with us, they're often going into the state process around budget priorities and election priorities, and sometimes they don't get up for things that they care about and we care about. And then if we go and kick them as well, I think it can feel pretty brutal. And sometimes we need to, because these issues matter and we've got to keep them on the agenda, but just being a bit mindful about how that all plays. And there's almost that time of when do you go public and when do you go hard and when do you pull back? And I think it's an imperfect science. I think we all do our best, but that's probably it in summary from me, Gary, I think for the moment, and happy to take any questions that you've got. And as I said, Karen's online as well. So Karen can jump in with any questions, particularly if anyone's got any particular interest around our election portfolio. Hearing the wise words of Elizabeth and Fiona, and others earlier. I should just mention, forgive me here, we did a listening tour around the state and backed it in with phone polling. So we worked with Neighbourhood Houses Victoria and went to local communities. Digital divide came up everywhere we went, as did loneliness, and issues around the digital divide, you know, in terms of people being connected and having devices and knowing how to use them and being upsold products because they didn't know. But the other thing that nearly everyone said to us is, I just want to talk to someone. Like, it's like everything's being moved online, from government to my energy service, etc. Why can't I just talk to someone, and why can't they just answer my problem? Because then I could just sort it out. And Fiona, there's so many things that you said that just resonated with me, but also one of the other things that stood out was for young people, and also though particularly for women over 50, the precariousness of housing for people who'd fundamentally been doing okay. So one woman in Bendigo who had worked all her life as a teacher, she'd retired over the last couple of years. Suddenly her circumstances have changed, and suddenly she's in a very precarious housing situation. So looking at some of the trends that we spotted around the state, but that's a whole nother discussion, so I won't get into that for now. But again, we did use the learnings from our listening tour to inform our advocacy and to continue to inform our advocacy. And we went and listened to hundreds of people in local communities, and we backed it in by phone polling. So when we've got our clear recommendations that are in the report, it's available online. It's a very powerful piece, I think, for government as well, but I'll stop now. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to do the thank you. So thanks, Emma. That's been absolutely enlightening about how you go about the work of the election platform, and then the lobbying that relates to it as well. I think that's a great example for all of us, because we know the power of the work that VCOS does. So this has been a great opportunity for us to understand more about that. For those of you who don't know, I'm Alexia. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Manager at COTA Victoria. And so my role is really just to wrap things up at this stage. And I'd like to thank everybody who's been here today. I think we've had some great speakers, and also just for the people who've come along to participate. There's been a really lively chat going on. So it's been a great occasion to look at the issues that affect older people and how we can lobby around those before the election. What we've done with our strategy and our platform is to focus on 6 issues. And from what the discussion today, I think I feel quite reinforced that these are important issues. We've tried to keep the asks as simple as possible. That's not always easy to do, but we wanted to have pithy, succinct kind of asks that we could be putting to politicians. And what's come up, there are many different ways we can lobby. And one of the things that we would be asking people to do after this event is to do something to contact your local MP, local candidates. And to help in that process, we have also set up a pro forma letter that you can use that embodies our platform, and you can then edit that as you want to. I think the link to it will come up in the chat in a minute. We use a platform called Action Network. So through this platform, if you click on this link, and it will be on our website as well, you can go to our pro forma letter and you can edit it to include as many of the asks as you want. So we've got all of the 6 asks in there. But if you just really want to talk about housing, or really want to talk about elder abuse, whatever it is, then you can edit the letter accordingly. When you go into Action Network, it will ask you for your name and address. And with that, it will identify the relevant members of Parliament, so both upper and lower house for you, that you can send the letter to. It will put your name and address on the letter. And Action Network do store your address and your name. We don't, COTA Victoria doesn't store that. It's within Action Network. If you have a concern about data storage, and who doesn't after the last few weeks and what we've seen, you can look at the privacy policy of Action Network on their website. And we may, if you choose to opt in, we may also then contact you again in future when we're doing other campaigns, because as you would have appreciated from today, also do a campaign around assistive technology for all. So we do have other campaigning that we do. So this is an opportunity for you to send a letter to your MP. I think we talked a lot about, you know, letter writing campaigns. They're only one way to get the attention of politicians, but if they get a lot of letters, that does have an impact on them as well. So Action Network is our way of providing you with the tools to start that kind of process. And I really would encourage people to do that. But also, once you have sent your letter, you can share that, for instance, on Facebook or whatever, so that other people know both about our platform, but also the possibility of using that themselves. So that's, you know, you can spread the word in that way as well. Now, I've got another request before we finish, which is that we always like to get some feedback on our events. Tells us what you enjoyed about them, what you felt useful out of them, but also how we can improve them. And I've already got a few suggestions out of the chat where people have sent me little messages saying, why don't you do it like this next time? And that's really valuable for us to get that kind of feedback. And so we've got a poll that we would ask people to do before we finish. And here I think that you should be able to see the poll now. So what you need to do is that you fill in the poll before you leave the meeting, and that's the way that you can give us feedback. And at this point, we're actually 5 minutes early, but it'll give you a chance to do the poll and still be finished by our end time. And I just one more time like to really thank our panelists and our presenters, and also to everybody who's attended today. It's really great to see a discussion about the concerns of older people and to start to be exploring how older people can really be a political voice to put their concerns across before the next election. So thanks very much, everybody. And please remember both to send a letter to your MP and the candidates in your electorate, but also to fill in our poll before you finish. And just one last thank you, which is to the people who've put this event together. So Amanda Kunkler, who you would have heard and has been monitoring the chat, who's done the organising of the event. Lauren Henley, who wrote our election platform and managed to keep it to a fairly simple, succinct but powerful platform. Gary Ferguson for doing his wonderful facilitating, and also Kirsty Chalmers, who's done a whole lot of work behind the scenes to make the event work and to set up Action Network for us as well. So it's truly been a team event by people from COTA Victoria, and thanks to all of them. And thanks to Lynette, who helps us to operate the Zoom as well. So I can see people are filling out the poll as we go. So please, the rest of you do that and have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks very much.